All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for our fifth and final webinar in our advocacy series, Connecting the Dots. Without further ado, let's jump right in. Next slide, please. A few short reminders beforehand. Today's webinar will be recorded and will be available for viewing on PVA's website at pva.org. Closed captioning is available. Please click on the meeting controls bar at the bottom of your screen to turn it on. If you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A box. Questions will be answered at the end of the program. Next slide, please. I'm Lisa Elijah, Grassroots Advocacy Manager, Air Force veteran, and PVA member.
Hey everybody, Julie Howell, Associate Legislative Director and Army vet.
Next slide, please. As a reminder, like we do each webinar, here's what we've covered so far in this series. We've discussed the fundamentals of government, the legislative process. We've talked about understanding the issues and becoming a change agent. And last month, we've covered who is advocating and who with, or the stakeholders of advocacy. Now we'll cover the art of advocacy, connecting the dots. Julie, I'll pass it over to you. Next slide, please.
All right, hello everyone. So I'm gonna go over the agenda for today. A bulk of today's webinar is gonna be review of the topics that we've covered over the past few months. And we'll talk a little bit more about how to craft your story, how to share it, and how to use all the things you've learned to make your advocacy efforts more impactful. We'll touch on our favorite topic, the three branches of government, the bicameral legislature, committees, the legislative process, funding and the budget, and an overview of advocacy. We're also going to talk a little bit more about legitimacy through your life's experiences, crafting your story, making the ask, and then we'll have a guest speaker join us to share with us his experience in advocacy and how being authentic led him to where he is today. Next slide, please. All right, Lisa, go ahead and remind everyone about the government.
Per the U.S. Constitution, there are three branches of government. Under the legislative branch, you have the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate. Under the executive branch, you have the office of the president and the vice president, along with departments under them. And under the judicial branch, you have the U.S. Supreme Court and then the federal and state courts. Next slide, please. Going back to our first webinar, I wanted to touch on the types of government we have, which are federal, state, and local government. State government is modeled after the federal government in its makeup. Local government looks a little different depending on the area, and they must be granted powers by the state. There are generally two tiers of local government, which consist of counties and municipal governments. Now we'll hand it over to Julie to take over the legislative body. Next slide, please.
All right. Understanding the bicameral chambers and their purpose is critical in knowing how to advocate. As a reminder, the legislative branch or Congress is made up of two chambers, hence that bicameral bit. As a reminder, that's the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate. Now, the House is made up of 435 officials who all serve a 2-year term. Districts are drawn every 10 years based on the compiled U.S. Census data. As a gentle reminder, always fill out your census form when they send it to you. The House of Representatives is responsible for initiating revenue and facilitating impeachment proceedings. Now, the U.S. Senate is made up of 100 elected officials who each serve a 6-year term. Re-elections are split in thirds, meaning that a third of the senators are up for re-election every 2-year election cycle. Now, the Senate is tasked with confirmation of executive appointments and ratifying treaties. When you look at a piece of legislation, there's letters followed by numbers. If the bill starts with an S, that means it's a Senate bill. Starts with an HR, that means it's a House bill. This is critical to know when it comes to reaching out to somebody, when it comes to supporting a bill. Next slide, please. Okay, we're going to take just a minute to talk about committees. You'll remember that a committee is a group of members appointed to investigate, debate, and report on legislation that impacts specific topic areas. Committees are also tasked with the oversight of those topic areas. Here at PVA National, we work with a lot of different committees, but particularly the House and Senate Veteran Affairs Committee. We also work with the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committees, sometimes even the House Ways and Means Committee. On the Senate side, we work a lot with the HELP Committee, which stands for Health, Education, Labor, and Pension Committee. A little bit of insider baseball for you. While areas of focus may be the same in the House and the Senate, that doesn't necessarily mean that the names are going to be the same for each committee. Not everyone is lucky enough to have something as simple as Veteran Affairs in their title. Different items fall under different committees of jurisdiction. And this matters so, again, that you know who to reach out to when you're looking to support or to find support for a specific bill. So if you've got a veterans bill, it's a pretty smart call to start with the Veteran Affairs Committee. Next slide, please. When it comes to asking the right people, think back to everything that we've covered over these past few weeks. Let's start with reading the bill. Is the bill you're working on a House bill or a Senate bill? So does it start with an S or an HR? Check out which committee or committees the bill has been referred to. Some more insider baseball. Like we said, any member of Congress can introduce the bill, but sometimes when members introduce legislation, they don't necessarily work on the committee that it's been referred to. When that happens, staff determine what the area of jurisdiction is for that bill, and then it's referred to the appropriate committee. When a bill is introduced, you can go to congress.gov to read through it. And just a not so fun fact, reading through legislation is kind of annoying. It's usually really complicated and it's seeking to make changes to the existing law. So there's a lot of references and there's a lot of points where things are being amended. It can get really, really complicated to have the points of the bill really seep through. Usually on congress.gov, if a bill has been around for a little while, there's a summary. Strongly encourage everybody to read the summary. Anyways, on congress.gov, you can look at things like the committee it's been referred to. You can see who has co-sponsored the bill and who introduced it. That information is always a great place to start. I can tell you it's kind of embarrassing when you go into an office and you ask someone to support a bill and then you find out they already support it. It's not a great feeling. It's definitely happened to me a couple times, but this is how come reading through the background information that we give you is so you never have to make that mistake like several of us already have. If that sounds like too much work, you can also go to the committee web pages to get updates on bills. Those committee web pages are also where you're going to find links for hearings and markups and oversight hearings. I'll also add that if you're meeting with a member of Congress and you think they support a bill, again, you can go over to congress.gov and double check. If they do support the bill that you're advocating for, they're likely to have a press release on their webpage that you can read. If you find that, go ahead and read through that. And when you have your meeting, don't forget to thank them because they really like when they're acknowledged for their work and their support. I just want to highlight that this same thought process works for local advocacy. You'll need to know who you're going to talk to about an issue. You need to do your research to see where folks stand on those issues. Make sure that they're the right people to be talking to. And as another reminder, you should only be talking with people who are your representatives, your member of Congress, your senator. Now, the caveat to that is that sometimes a piece of legislation goes to a committee that your representative isn't on. You can reach out to committee members to get support for that legislation. Next slide, please. All right, the legislative process. We took an entire webinar to describe this, so I'm just going to briefly touch on a few things. As a reminder, that was our second webinar that is available on the webpage. Next slide, please. All right, this should look pretty familiar to everybody. I like to call this legislative chutes and ladders. This map is all of the steps it takes to get a bill across the finish line. For the sake of this conversation, I'm going to talk about the traditional path of a bill. Think about that Schoolhouse Rocks image that we just saw. Again, this is a very simple example of the path a bill might take. And for this, we're going to assume the path starts with the House of Representatives and the Veteran Affairs Committee. We already know that only a member of Congress can introduce the bill. That bill is going to be discussed at a pending legislation hearing, which takes place at the subcommittee level. The subcommittee needs to agree and vote it out to the full committee. From there, the legislation will be what is called marked up. That'll happen with the full committee where all of the members get to chime in about what they like, what they don't like. They got to offer amendments and other tweaks can be made to improve that legislation. If the full committee votes to pass the bill, from there it goes to the floor of the House where the full body gets to vote. Once that bill clears the House, it's referred to the Senate. And from there, it's going to be reviewed by the Senate Veteran Affairs Committee. There's another opportunity then for the senators to be able to mark up that bill or make their own amendment. Once it's cleared through that committee, it goes to the Senate floor. If it's passed through the chamber, it heads to the president's desk to be signed into law. Again, that's a very, very oversimplified explanation. But as you can see on this slide, there's a lot of steps to go into passing a bill. And as we talked before, it's super intentional. The pace and the steps required to pass a bill, at least in theory, exist to prevent us from passing harmful legislation that isn't well thought out. Now, sometimes the bill doesn't have to go through the normal procedures like I just explained, particularly big bills that respond to emergencies. Again, just for the sake of this, let's assume that this is the very basics of normal procedure. All right, I think Lisa's going to talk to us about some funding stuff now. So go ahead and take it away, Lisa.
All right, thanks, Julie. Next slide. Oh, yeah, there we go. All right, so budget. Within the federal budget, there are two spending areas: discretionary spending and mandatory spending. Mandatory spending covers about 2/3 of all federal spending and accounts for things such as Social Security and outstanding debts. They don't need to be voted on by Congress as they are deemed necessary to continue the function of our government. On the other hand, discretionary spending will not occur unless Congress acts each year to provide the funding through an appropriations bill, like that of the national defense. What falls into the appropriations category are things such as reauthorization. When authorization expires, Congress can choose to extend the life of a program by reauthorizing the funding on it. We are coming up at the end of the 2023 fiscal year, the end of this September. Come October 1st, we will begin the 2024 fiscal year. Every year, agencies request funding, budget funding, to the White House. It is then reviewed, and based on the president's priorities, the president's budget is created. In spring, the president releases his budget and recommends for the upcoming fiscal year to Congress to act on. So for this next spring, he will release recommendations for the 2025 fiscal year. We've noticed some shortfalls in the funding requests for VA in the presidential budget. In collaboration with DAV and VFW, we published the independent budget. The independent budget gives us an outline of priorities for VSOs on issues that are important to Congress for the upcoming year. It also gives us a blueprint on priorities to advocate for what are likely to get the most attention. Now let's review some of the elements of advocacy. Next slide, please. Advocacy consists of some basic fundamentals. Not all are needed at the same time, but each is important in its own way. They consist of identifying a program or issue, finding an objective and the best way to tackle an issue, collecting data and research, finding out who your audience is and the best way to both present your issue and the message behind it to them, building coalitions of advocates and groups to amplify the message, and evaluating the outcome. Next slide, please. We hear the term stakeholder thrown a lot in the policy world, but what does it mean exactly? So a stakeholder is simply anyone that is interested or concerned with a particular issue. Julie is a stakeholder. Myself, you, PVA, your local chapter, elected officials and their staff, and even researchers, all can be stakeholders. It's a term used to condense an audience revolving around an issue to anyone concerned with that policy problem. Now I'm going to hand it over to Julie. Next slide, please.
Let me unmute. Thanks, Lisa. So what do we mean when we say put all the pieces together? From our previous webinars and from Lisa's quick overview, you all know what to focus on. You've identified a policy issue that you wish to address. You've got your allies to help get the word out. You, in theory, have come up with a solution. And for the sake of this, we'll just say that a solution exists in the form of a piece of legislation that you're advocating for. Together, you've tailored a message that's digestible and that resonates with various audiences. And you've got a plan to gain political support. That's why we talk so much about the legislative process, because you really need to understand how things work in order to find effective political support. Again, do you need a representative or a senator to push that bill? Are they on the right committee? Does that person that you're talking with, does their mission align with your objectives? All of those things are critical in understanding when it comes to being an effective advocate. And now you've got all of those pieces put together in the puzzle. Now you're ready to hit the hill and share your story. Next slide, please. I want to take a minute to talk about how to make your advocacy personal and impactful. Legitimacy through life experiences is probably one of the greatest superpowers that veterans, and in particular PVA members, have. You're the only person who's ever lived your life and experienced the things that you have. Those experiences make you a true expert. Now, you may not believe that, but it's absolutely true. When you're in DC or in a local office at home and you're advocating, you need to share your experiences with the people that you meet. As we heard last time from our guest, John Towers, hearing your stories is what makes things real for a lot of these people. If you're going to be personally impacted by a piece of legislation, you should be prepared to talk to staff and elected officials about how that bill is going to make things better for you and for people like you. Remember that you're the human face of data. We can share numbers and stories all day, but until some of these folks see you in person and hear about your experiences in real time, they don't really understand. Again, this is why your experience matters so much. You help make this stuff real for people. How you navigate spaces is critical for identifying barriers. Remember when I talked last time about offices in Capitol Hill being really small? Sometimes furniture needs to be moved to accommodate a wheelchair. For some of these staffers, that might be the first time they've interacted with a wheelchair user. We hear all of the time from staff that they didn't realize how difficult it is for PVA members to navigate the Hill. For a lot of them, it's a pretty profound experience. So never forget that you being there might open someone's eyes to the barriers that are all around them, but they've never really noticed them. This is a solid way to build allies because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Next slide, please. All right, when you're preparing to share your story, use all of those resources that are available to you. Everything that we've been talking about and then harping on again today. Double check the materials that you've been provided so that you know what you're talking about. Consider your experience, the data you found, the talking points that you finalized with your coalition, tie all of that together for a meaningful message. When it comes to sharing your story, keep in mind that you'll often only have a minute or two to really drive your point home. So practice with your friends or family, even though it sometimes feels a little awkward, maybe in the mirror. But it really isn't terribly complicated. Try something like, hello, I'm so-and-so. I'm a PVA member or a member of your community. As a disabled veteran, I'd like to bring to your attention this issue. This impacts me in this way. There's a bill that seeks to fix this problem, and here's how it would help me and people like me. We'd love your support on getting this bill across the finish line to help improve the lives of other veterans or constituents. I mean, it really is that simple. You don't need to make up statistics. You don't need to lie or exaggerate. You just got to tell the truth. And if they ask you questions that you don't know the answers to, that is totally fine. You just say, you know what? That's a great question, but unfortunately, I don't have the answer for you. I will find that and get the answer to your staff. They're going to respect that answer. Like John said last time, being authentic carries more weight than knowing all of the answers. I can assure you, very few people know even most of the answers when it comes to this stuff on the Hill. Okay, trying to think if there's anything I missed. I don't think there is, but that was a heck of a review. Thanks for staying with us. And now I'd like to introduce our guest speaker for the day. Our very own Carl Blake has agreed to join us. Let's see, where are we at? There we go. Thanks for taking some time to talk with us, Carl.
Thank you, Julie. I'm happy to be here. And thank you, Lisa, also.
Great. Carl, would you tell us a little bit about how you got involved with PVA?
Yeah, so I'll share the short version of my story. I was injured while serving in the Army and subsequently became a PVA member. I spent a year in the VA in Richmond, Virginia doing rehab. And during the course of that, I met PVA members who were all around. And I also met a service officer from PVA who helped me get my benefits and also took my resume knowing I was looking for a job. And somehow or the other, my resume made it to Washington, D.C., where our national office is. And I was hired by my first boss, Doug Vollmer, who was the Associate Executive Director of Government Relations way back in the day and been a long staple of PVA to work in our Government Relations Department, specifically on our legislative program. And from that point, I spent about 16 years working in government relations.
That's incredible. I don't even think I've ever heard your story on that. So thanks for
That's a
sharing
very
that.
short version. I don't share my, unless it's necessary, I don't usually share all of my story.
That's fair. That's fair. Well, you just said that you were either on the team or ran the GVR team for years. What would you tell members before they met with representatives on the Hill?
Well, my motto for most anyone doing advocacy is, if you're going to say nothing, say it with gusto. What that means is, if you don't know what you're talking about, if you could at least do it with emotion and confidence, that'll get you at least halfway there. Now, as a general rule of thumb, it's not good to do advocacy and not really have any idea what you're talking about, even though that seems like a fairly common thing that happens with people nowadays who just sort of bluster on about issues and don't necessarily understand the issues. Really what I tell people is, as you're getting into advocacy, kind of immerse yourself in whatever the issue is. Now, if you have a bunch of issues, that gets a little more complicated, but you should learn everything there is to know about your issue. Julie mentioned, you mentioned data earlier. There's almost always some data point that ties to the advocacy you're doing. It's also important to take the time to understand. It's easy to do advocacy with an office where an elected official member of Congress is supportive of your issue. That's not hard advocacy, except to your point that you made earlier. Make sure you know if they actually support your issue or not. That's part of immersing yourself in the issue so that you don't get caught off guard when they say, well, I think we already support this bill, because then you just look a little sheepish. But it happens. It's happened to me too. I'm not going to pretend like it never happened to me. What's more important, I think, is to understand the counter arguments to your issue. Unfortunately, as you all are probably well aware, Washington has become more and more polarized, so it becomes more difficult. But historically, you're going to be the most successful if you understand where someone who's going to be otherwise opposed to your issue is coming from, and then to try to have a rational and reasonable conversation about the issues and understand why they might have that perspective. And over the years, we were sometimes successful in converting people to our point of view and supporting an issue, and sometimes you're unsuccessful. Some of our issues do overlap into very controversial areas, and that's where it gets difficult. But I think the key to good advocacy is to really know your issue inside and out, so that you don't get stumped or get tripped up by something you don't see coming. And then when you go in to be an advocate, you just have to be confident. To my point about say it with gusto, just be confident. It's hard sometimes, especially for new people. Some people just don't like social engagement. It's not they're uncomfortable in that setting. And you mentioned small offices. Until you've sat in an office so small that your knees are basically touching one another, or your wheelchair is touching the knees of the staffer, you don't know how uncomfortable that situation can be, especially if you're talking about a contentious issue. But, be confident when you're in that conversation, and don't give up. Don't go in there one time, have an interaction, and then give up, even if they say, no, this is not going to happen. Where what we do at the national level fits in well with what many of you can do at the local level is there's the exchange that happens for you all there at the local level and us at national, and they often tie back to one another. And I think we've had the most success over the years where our members coming in, they advocate at the national level, but they also build the same relationships at the local level. So you get more people within an office or on a committee who are vested in the issue and are willing to help you advance your effort. So I said a lot there. I don't know if I answered the question, but
You've inadvertently answered all of the questions with that. So I'm trying to now parse out how to ask the next one. To that point, either locally or nationally. So if they're at their chapter or they're with us at a seminar, for those folks that aren't great with that social engagement, do you have any tips or advice for folks that are nervous? Anything they can do to help them sort of not get so tripped up, or any tricks that you have used over the past?
I think nerves are just inherently part of the work. I think a way to relieve yourself of the anxiety of it is to really know your issue. I've said in a lot of meetings for a long time, when we would have seminar, I would go with some chapters and representatives, And I think what gets people in trouble is they just try to read the information that's available to them. And you said something earlier that I think is key. I think if you can understand the issue enough that you can personalize it and speak to your own situation or tell a story, people tend to get, start to look up and face people when they're telling a story. If you're just trying to read from your data or your information or your talking points, it's hard to get, turn your head away from looking at that piece of paper. Once you start to personalize the issue that you're talking about, it becomes easier to get comfortable, to be confident in what you're talking about. So I think your point that you made earlier about you being able to craft your story and tell your story, nothing makes an issue or an advocate more successful than being able to actually personalize the issue that they're to talk about. Because quite frankly, that's the number one way to combat somebody who maybe has just a diametrically opposed view on the issue to you. If you confront them directly with the issue, I'll use as a perfect example, probably one of the most controversial issues that we've advocated for over the years was in vitro fertilization for our members who had catastrophic injury and was service connected. That gets into a very complicated ground when you talk about abortion politics and things like that. And I can tell you some of the best exchanges, although tense exchanges we ever had, was taking in some of our members who were living that experience, who had that as an issue, and were saying to this person who's otherwise completely opposed to it, what you're saying is, I don't have the opportunity to have a child. And that, it leads to sometimes some very heated conversation, but sometimes it's a little bit of an enlightening conversation for those people who would otherwise be opposed, because now you've put a face to the issue specifically, and that face is sitting in front of them. So I think the best way to overcome nerves is to personalize it, make it about storytelling, not just about, well, here's what the data says, here's the number of people that can benefit from the change, here's the dollars. And we can talk about that stuff all day long. And then I think it's also important to remember, in many cases, you're probably talking to a 21, 22, 23-year-old staffer who might be fresh out of college, and they probably don't know the issue much better, or maybe even not as well as you know it. And so there's a degree of nervousness from their point of view, especially when faced with someone sitting there in a wheelchair who's dealing with challenges that they more often than not can't even fathom. So it's okay to be nervous. If you can make them more nervous by really being confident and knowing the issue, that puts you in an even better position.
To that point, for everybody, I will say that I think when you're nervous, it should tell yourself that you have a certain element of respect for what you're about to do. Like, trust your nerves, don't give in to them, but embrace it and own it. Another point I will add is, for those folks who come out for seminar, the reason we give you the background materials the first day before you ever even hit the hill is so you can do what Carl just said, like read through all that stuff, get to know it a bit, so you can figure out the way that it matters to you, so that when you're in these meetings, you're not just reading off the page, because there's no quicker way to get people disinterested in what you're talking about than to just read bullet points off a page. I wonder, Carl, if you could talk a little bit about, like, you'd mentioned sometimes you talk about contentious issues, sometimes you may not align on all these things. Have you been able to find common ground when you go into an office that maybe you're worried might get a little bit more contentious than it needs to because of certain topics?
Well, I think you have to accept that, especially in the political environment that we operate in today, there's just a degree of tension that exists that didn't exist even when I started doing this 20 years ago. It's just the nature of politics as it is, generally speaking, now. I think that it's okay to have a contentious issue. I think it's important, before you have your meetings, I go back to doing your homework, to kind of understand who the people are that you're meeting with, because the majority of these folks are going to treat our members and people advocating on our behalf with some degree of respect that they might not ordinarily give because of the nature of our members' service, the nature of their disability. So you kind of go in there with a little bit of I guess what you call it, like a competitive advantage compared to some advocates, because of how they recognize the sacrifices that have been made. sometimes it's just an issue and the right person's going to sit there. It can get ugly. I mean, I've had a few over the years, not many, but a few very ugly conversations. It's good to understand the counter argument to their argument. It's not necessarily what you're advocating for. It could be something it's kind of off the path, because nothing frustrates someone who's trying to be contentious more than a solid argument against that person, even if it's not exactly your issue, if it's tangential to your issue. And I would say, I said this earlier, the key is to not get rattled when someone says something that is, there are times where somebody will say something and it will bother you. It might get your blood boiling almost on the spot. And that's happened to me a couple of times over the years. And the key is to not lose your cool in that situation. If you feel that's the situation that's developing, figure out a way to just sort of end the meeting respectfully and maybe agree to revisit the conversation at a later time. You don't want to let it continue to escalate, because it can reach a point where it can get out of control. And you don't want to be the person that loses control in that situation, because, obviously there are members of Congress that sometimes nowadays don't care about that. That's where we are. And I think the the people at the national level are in many ways reflective of the way state level legislatures act now too. So, there's much more bomb throwing. There's much more agitation that goes on in politics. It's inherent on us to keep our cool, to be confident, to be respectful, and just represent the issue that we're there to represent, and don't get lured in or get baited into a conversation that could take you off the track, because that's likely to happen if you do this for very long and spend a lot of time visiting with a lot of offices.
Thanks for that. I think our last question is going to be, can you share with the group an experience that you remember about advocacy that either went really, really well or really, really badly?
So I'll try to give an example of both. As you and I discussed, really, really well is usually reflected in some good policy change that's enacted into law. So you can usually feel good. You can point to some bit of advocacy that probably led to that positive change. I'll use as an example. You all mentioned earlier appropriations, when we were fighting for advance appropriations for the VA healthcare system. We had there was some very strong opposition from fiscal conservatives, and this is where the interplay of us at national and the chapter level representatives made a real difference. Two of the real holdouts were the two senators from Oklahoma, Senator Inhofe and Senator Coburn, and our local representative, I don't think he's on here now, but Scott Ellis, who was at the chapter, had such a good relationship with those offices. And I can promise you, especially Senator Coburn, he was a tough customer. But the work that they had done at the chapter level and with those offices, it's not overstating it to say helped turn the tide on that issue. And we were able to be successful and get that enacted. And to see how we mutually supported one another to get a very major policy change made that was favorable for VA and for veterans served by VA that's what I would probably qualify as a good experience. Bad experience, short of cursing at a congressional committee, which I don't consider that a bad experience. It just happens from time to time. I've probably had a couple over the years that were really over the top individual congressional meetings. And I won't share what some of those comments were, because they're they tend to be very inflammatory, and that happens. That's a rare occasion. I had an instance when I was very new in my role in government relations, where a congresswoman, and I had not learned the be cool, don't get rattled point at that point. I was still pretty young. I think I still thought I was in the infantry and thought I could, fire and brimstone, and that just wasn't a workable solution. And I had a congresswoman that, for all intents and purposes, baited me into a reaction that was not positive, didn't really reflect well on me, and everyone in the room knew it. And nobody cared that was what the congresswoman had said. All they cared about was, look at the near fool that I made of myself as a result of my reaction to that. Fortunately, I learned, a valuable lesson, which is don't just react right there in that moment in time to something that's said. Be a little more deliberate and a little more methodical in your response. Sometimes it's better to say nothing, especially when baited into someone is trying to get you to say something that you're going to regret more often than not. And so sometimes it's good to just not respond. So that it happens. It's inevitable. And as we bring people to Washington, like I said, Washington is getting more contentious. It's inevitable that people are going to run into those types of interactions. Now, fortunately, most of our issues don't cross that line that gets people's ire up. Although I would go so far as to say, when I started here, veterans issues were really sort of a nonpartisan issue. Now they're in a line they're somewhere between bipartisan and partisan. Veterans issues have become more and more of a political football than any time in the past. And of course, we also do a lot of advocacy work on the disability community side, and those can be very contentious. They tend to be much more contentious. The work that we do on air travel is a perfect example of pretty hardened lines of opinion on those issues. And so, it's I think I'm not sure that we're going to go back. I'm not sure if this pendulum is going to swing back to easier advocacy and a little more respectful environment. I don't know. It doesn't feel like that's where we are now. So it will challenge anybody that comes to Washington, anybody that's representing PVA to be professional in how you conduct yourself, which is a must. And to be confident and, again, understand what you're there to represent and what your end goal is. What do you hope to achieve? Unfortunately, legislative work is a long game more often than not. Heather and I chat sometimes. I bristle because it seems like in the last 5 years, there's been a lot of success with a lot of things, but most work is a very long game, and it takes time and patience and commitment. If you're not successful the first time, the right answer is not to give up, because if you give up, you're not going to achieve that goal. So, I think that's it.
I think that's a solid point to highlight for everybody. Like, policy is the long game. Sometimes these bills are around for more than 1 or 2 Congresses. I mean, if it's around for 3, that's 6 years. And that's you guys flying to DC and making the same apps over and over again. Sometimes it's new people, sometimes it isn't. But eventually you wear them down and you show that there's a need and that this is going to improve the lives of somebody. And hopefully we end up with a bill turning into law at the end of this. Carl, I'll give you one opportunity. Like, do you have anything else you want to share with these folks? You listened in today, most of this. Anything you think we should highlight before we close this out?
I would just say that you are an extension of us. Julie and the folks in legislation, and Lisa and Danica and all the folks in government relations. It's a fairly small team, and they can only reach so many places at any one time. And so everyone that's on the webinar here today, everyone that we bring into Washington, D.C. in June of next year are extensions of us. And frankly, you all tell the story better than we do. You are the personification of PVA and the direct representation of our organization. So I hope you understand how much we value your role in our process. More often than not, we don't get these things done without the people on this call being visible to the people that make the policy decisions. If you shrink off into the shadows, that doesn't help us. They'll forget that we were there, and we won't be successful. So, and then the last thing I'll say is build your relationships at home, whether it be national representatives or your state level. Especially on the disability side, there's a lot of work that goes on at the state and local level that impact our members as people with disabilities. So it's incumbent upon you all to build those relationships at your state and local level, because you can make some what might not seem like monumental change to you, but it can be, even at the lowest level of government. So just get in the game. We need you to do that for us to be successful as an organization.
Awesome. Thank you again, Carl, for taking the time to talk with us. Hannah, if you wouldn't mind pulling the slide deck back up. And then I'm going to pass it off to Lisa to close us out.
All right, thanks, Julie. And thank you so much, Carl, for joining us today. All right, so we've been through a lot these past few months. We've learned about federal, state, and local governments, how the legislative process works, the breakdown of cost of bills, where funding comes from, and why the budget matters. We also took a deeper dive into the breakdown of advocacy, including who stakeholders are, owning your story, and how it helps shape your advocacy. And finally, how to use all of that information to advocate for yourself and others. Thank you for taking the time to learn about advocacy and your government with us. Now, let's jump into the Q&A. Next slide, please. All right, if you have any questions, we're happy to answer them. Usually we have Heather Ainsley with us today, but of course, she's here to usually read through questions. Go ahead and throw them at us if you have any. And of course, if you have any that you're not able to share in the questions, or you'd like to think about a little bit and send it to us later on, you can reach us at julieh@pva.org and lisae@pva.org.
I'm just going to address a couple of these questions live real quick. Someone has asked, where can we get transcriptions of previous webinars? All of the webinars will be on the PVA webpage. I believe it's under the Action Force tab. And when we send out, maybe we can send that out to all of our participants, actually, like a direct link to everybody. So Lisa and I will take care of that. How can I make sure that I have all of my sessions completed? Lisa, that's a you question.
So as long as you've been here and you've been present for every single webinar, then you'll be marked off for every single one that you've been through, whether that's you've done 3, whether you've done all of them, if you've just done 1. I have that information already. Zoom is able to give me a list of those who stayed in the webinar and watched the whole thing. But if for some reason you missed some of them, that happens, then we will be posting it obviously on our PVA website on the PVA Action Force tab, which is new, by the way. And you can go there, review it, and then send me the code, and I will make sure that you get marked off. I have a completed list where I'm telling everyone that's been, what they viewed, as well as if there are a few that you've missed and I've noticed that, like maybe you have just 1 or 2, I'm going to be sending out an email reminder to you just with the link to where it's at. So you can go ahead and get those completed and email me with the code. All right.
Where can we find out about the PVA role on Capitol Hill? So I'm going to guess that's the former title of Seminar. All of that information should come out at the beginning of next year. Stay in touch with your chapter government relations director. All of you should have one. And they will be able to provide all the information about the upcoming seminar. Carl came off camera. He might have something to say.
I was just going to say, for those of you who don't know, I think I'm at liberty to announce, even though I think we already did, that the seminar will be in mid-June next year. So for those of you who have been accustomed to coming in March, the same event will be held in mid-June next year instead. So we again look forward to having you join. If you're not typically connected to your chapter, either A, reach out to your local chapter, or B, reach out to our national office staff here and share your interest in participating.
And I think Carl makes a really great point in terms of getting in contact with your local chapter. We do have members that are at large. Actually, I was a member at large at first when I first joined PVA, but usually in order to connect with and go and speak in Capitol Hill and advocate and do seminars, it's much better to be with a chapter because they have the connections to your state and local representatives. And that's the way that we work it out a little bit better. So if that's something you're definitely interested in, then look into your local chapters and get connected there.
one of these questions is, how do I know how many I need to catch up on? We'll tag you and we'll get Lisa to do some review for you on that one. Just to clarify, you will send us or we can email you to find out what webinars. Yeah, we'll do a review. We'll task our great Lisa with that. And for folks that have something they need to catch up on, we'll make sure you get the link. I also just want to tell everyone that I put the link to the PVA Action Force where our webinars are. It's in the chat. We will get that out to you though. So like, you don't need to freak out about clicking on that in the chat. We will make sure to get it to everybody. Dan Hilbert, I see. Where can we find out which Congress people are friendly or supportive of PVA causes? That's actually a really great question. On our webpage, you will find links to the bills that we are advocating for. It'll bring you to congress.gov. And on congress.gov, you can find who has sponsored or co-sponsored those bills. Congress.gov really is sort of like a one-stop shop. It answers a lot of questions when it comes to this kind of thing. Sometimes it gets a little complicated because maybe we're pushing for an issue that doesn't necessarily have a legislative solution yet. We're still working on that. But if the bill exists already, good chance that you'll be able to find out through congress.gov if your representative supports the legislation.
And
I do want to. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
And one quick thing, fun fact, we actually, in the future, we're working on something to highlight our biggest advocates within each of your states. So it's not a thing to shame any of your representatives or your senators. We're just wanting to uplift the ones that have been the biggest advocate for us. So that will be coming in the future. We're going to start doing that in a biannual and annual newsletter for you.
Awesome. I want to highlight something that Milton Young put in the Q&A. He says that he found going to town hall meetings are super effective with area leaders. That's a great way to get involved at a local level. You may have noticed this month, you might have heard a lot more from your representatives. They're all on recess. They're all, in theory, in their district, waiting for opportunities to talk at you and hopefully hear from you. That's a great way to sort of break the ice for some of these relationships that maybe you're a little bit hesitant to start, that Carla talked about. I just want to stress, like, these people are just people. They just happen to win an election. They're elected. We should respect them, absolutely. But they're just a person. They have concerns just like you do. They are not subject matter experts on everything that they work on. They need the experience and the understanding shared with them by their constituents to understand what's important to the broader community. So hit up those town halls, go to, like when they go to like a ribbon cutting or if they have a town hall or something like that, follow their webpage, see where they're going to be, follow them on social media. There's a ton of opportunities locally to get to know these folks. And like Carl said, once you know them at a local level, when you come to DC to hang out with us, when you go in that office, they're stoked to see you. They get very excited, particularly if you have played the game right and you've done the thank yous and the this and the that. They love that stuff. They eat it up. Work on those relationships locally so that if you do come out with us to DC, you can have that in common. I don't know how to unmute Milton. Hannah, can you do that?
You should be able to talk now.
Milton, you got something to share with us? Oh, you might be on mute. Maybe
Can you
he's
hear
just
me
waving
now?
hello. Ah, there we go. Hi, Milton.
Hi, and everything. Just what I wanted to share. The thing of it is when we started this and everything, and I found and you sent us all the policies. I found out, like for example, with our Congresswoman Emily Sykes and others, that going to town hall with the message and they have other constituents there and everything, and discussing the veterans issues. Everyone supports veterans, especially when you're bringing in your disabled veteran like we are with PVA, and the message really resonates with them, especially when other people in the crowd, I mean, that be at these town halls, start asking questions about it and everything. So it's kind of getting other people involved, and then even after the meeting, individuals ask you questions, because I always say, everyone has someone, whether it was World War II, and it's not many of them, Korea, Vietnam, Persian Gulf, that have served and may be going through all kind of issues, just not individuals with spinal cord injuries or disease, but we're talking about PTSD and other issues. So and you follow mine. Mine had 2 town halls here in Canton, Ohio. Then went to Barberton, and I attended all hers, and a couple of our congressional leaders here, and also on the state level.
It's a great point. Sorry, I'm trying to multitask here. Hannah just put in, I think, Cleveland. All right. I don't see anything else in the chat. I have messaged some people one-on-one. We're going to close this out. So as you see, Lisa and mine's email is on the screen. If you have any questions that weren't answered today, or if you have any follow-ups that you think of, feel free to reach out to us. And yeah, we will do our best to answer them in a timely manner. I'm just double checking the chat before we close this out. I don't want to be rude to anybody. Stephen, I'm going to follow up with you offline. All right, at least on my behalf, and I'm pretty sure on Lisa's behalf as well. Thank you guys for joining us for these. It started out as kind of just an idea, but you guys have stuck with us on this, and thanks for doing that. And thanks for spending so much time with us about this.
All right. And so for those who are viewing the recording afterwards, Anna, if you could just pull up the slide with the code on it real quick. Okay, so this is our 5th and final advocacy webinar series, which is an exciting thing. For those participants that are viewing the recording and you want credit for it after the session, please go ahead and email the code 5CT2D5 to myself at lisae@pva.org. As we had mentioned before, those who have stuck through the webinars, I have a way of viewing that, and I will be emailing you afterwards for those who have missed a few, so you can go ahead and get caught up. If you've completed all 5 webinars in this series, keep a lookout for your PVA Government Relations Certificate. If you've missed any of them and would like credit, go ahead and view the videos. Other than that, that's a wrap. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.